Washington Post journalist David Finkel spent 8 months embedded with the 216 Infantry Battalion in Iraq. After the tour, he re-embedded with a few members of the battalion on home soil. He details that experience in his new book, Thank You for Your Service. And he joins us now. Here's David Finkel from Washington. Thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Hi, Steve. Thank you.
Well, in 2009, you did The Good Soldiers, and that chronicled the deployment of the 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry, during the 2007 surge in Iraq. How does this book pick up from where that story left off?
Well, that book, it was a chronicle of the day-to-day life of 800 soldiers, infantry soldiers, who were basically sent into what was considered by so many people as the last tragic moment of a war gone wrong. And you know, off these guys went into it, young, 19, 20 years old, filled with a sense of mission, invincibility, and then they got there, and they began losing guys, and things darkened for them, and they came home. So I wrote basically that's a chronicle of guys go to war, guys are changed by war, guys come home. I thought I was done, but after that book came out, I began hearing from more and more of them, and family members as well, talking about how they weren't doing so well. And so I realized I had written half a book, and it was time to write the second half. The difference is this is a book about families trying to recover from the war. In these families, the central character has become some type of mental injury, psychological injury, because of what they endured, and now they get to deal with it.
And that phrase, "Thank you for your service," which you titled the book, where's that come from?
Well, I mean, we've all heard the phrase by now. It's ubiquitous, and the title isn't meant to be ironic in any way, really, or bitter or scolding. It's a phrase that's uttered so much, maybe it's lost some depth to it. And I think if you read this book, the stories between the covers of what people are going through, you'll understand, if you say that, you'll understand more of who you're thanking and a lot more of what you're thanking them for.
I can see pictures, though, of former President George W. Bush going through Walter Reed, I think, and saying it to each soldier in bed. Well, sure. I mean, he means it when he says it, right? But,
yes.
But
I don't want to quarrel with anyone who says it. I'm sure they have. It's a serious thing they're trying to say, but that doesn't mean they understand fully what has gone on in the war, what it's like to be a soldier. Not at the high levels of making policy, but at the ground level where so much of the tactical part of the war is fought. And who really understands what coming home is like except these families themselves? The guys have come back with invisible wounds that they don't quite believe themselves, and they go into families where the expectation is he's home now, everything's going to be okay, and it's not. It's not. It's a day-to-day scramble to regain some sense of control that was lost when they went to war in the first place.
Of the tens of thousands of troops that have gone to Afghanistan and Iraq, what percentage do you think have come home with some kind of mental illness or injury?
So the numbers work out to, the best estimates now are 20 to 30% of the 2 million Americans, and I can just speak to Americans in regarding these numbers. The 2 million who were sent into Iraq and Afghanistan, 20 to 30% have suffered some type of psychological trauma. So that works out to about 500,000, which is, I mean, that means two things. Number one, 1.5 million have come home okay. And most people in any war do come home okay. This book isn't their book. They can have another one. This book is about some of the 500,000 who have come home who aren't okay. And again, it's just day-to-day life, what it's like to try to, when you come home and from the most extreme situation back into some sense of normalcy, and you can't feel normal, how do you get back there, and how do these families get back there?
I want to pick up on something you said a moment ago, which is they come home and they haven't lost a limb or an arm, but they come home wounded. They're broken in some respects. And let's start with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
Give me your favorite story from the book about a guy who came home and thought he was okay, but the fact is he's not okay, and he's guilty because he's got all his limbs, but he's got a problem.
Well, it's if I can reframe it a little bit, it's less about people who are feeling okay and it slowly dawns on them they're not. Rather, it's about believing something is wrong with them. The importance is, the distinction is important. So there's a guy, the main person in this new book is a guy named Adam Schumann. And like so many people in this book, I was with these folks during their war. Adam Schumann was a fascinating guy. You know, he, unlike most of them, he was on his third deployment during the surge. He had been in combat for 1,000 days. A lot of people looked up to him. He was considered one of the very best soldiers in the battalion. He was
Where's
a leader.
He from?
He's from Kansas, like so many of these guys are. And you know, the day came when he just couldn't do it anymore. So in the first book, in The Good Soldiers, when we first meet Adam Schumann, it's when I met him. I was asking around, who's a great soldier? I kept hearing this guy Schumann's name. So eventually I went to meet him. I walked into his room, and the great soldier I'm greeted with is a guy who looks so haunted, so gaunt, is sitting by himself in his room. And I introduced myself, and he said, I guess I know why you're here. And I said, well, I hear you're a pretty great soldier. He said, well, I'm leaving the war today. And he was on his way out because it just, so many things had happened, and he finally couldn't do it anymore. And so I stayed with him that day until he walked to the helicopter out of the war, the helicopter that was sending him home. And he wasn't thinking at that moment about the good things he had done, how well he had served. He was thinking about the shame he felt for having to leave early. So he gets to the helicopter line, and there are like 6 guys in line. He's at the back of the line. In come a couple of helicopters, loud dust, I mean, you know. Everyone moves forward, and when he's at the front of the line, his hand comes out, and the guy yells, next one's yours. So everyone leaves, and now it's just Adam Schumann, the great Adam Schumann, standing there by himself. And in comes the next set of helicopters, and these have big red crosses on the side. And as I write in the first book, these are the helicopters for the injured and the dead. And that's when, you know, Schumann starts thinking, yeah, that's who I am now. I'm injured, I'm dead, I'm done. And he comes home, again, cloaked in shame. And how many times after that has he said to me, if I could just look in the mirror and see some representation of an injury, it would be so much easier for me if I were missing an arm or missing a leg or had something scarred over, a hole, if there was some asymmetry to me. But instead I'm a guy, I look the same as ever, and they keep telling me I'm sick and I don't believe it. So that's what I mean in reshaping the question. The difficulty is for these rough and tough guys to acknowledge that it's something happens sometimes in war that is so profound, it rattles you to the bones, and it's okay to be rattled, and you got to find a way to be better after that.
Okay, PTSD is one, traumatic brain injury, TBI, is the other. Mm-hmm. Ayeti, one of the soldiers in your book. Am I saying his name right?
You are. Tesolo Ayeti.
What happened to him?
Well, so TBI, or traumatic brain injury, is the psychological damage that results basically when you get your brain rattled really hard. And I guess that brings us to Ayeti. Again, just like I was with Schumann in the war, I was with Ayeti the day he was injured. And, you know, the circumstances were these. Here's a guy, if you or I were ever in a war in a given moment, I think we would hope to behave like Ayeti did on this particular day. 5 guys in a Humvee, in a convoy, deep buried explosives. The guy in the shadows hits the trigger at the right time. Humvee blown sky high. It comes down, lands hard, and that's where Ayeti gets his brain rattled. And he also has a broken leg. He gets out of the Humvee as it's catching on fire, and he realizes there are a couple of guys inside still, more wounded. So he makes his way back to the Humvee and pulls out 2 guys. Pretty amazing.
And still blames himself, though.
Well, he can't get to the driver. No one gets to the driver, who burns to death. And so Ayeti, you know, I met him down at the aid station that day when he was being worked on, and I was with him when he found out the driver died. And I can look at you, but I can see the look on Ayeti's face, and I'll forever see that look, just the stricken look. What happened to him after that, and what he told no one for a long time, is that he began having dreams at least once a week, and some weeks much more often. And it was always the same dream. It was about the guy who died. Not about the guys he saved, but the guy who died. And in the dream, that guy is on fire and saying to Ayedi, "Why didn't you save me?" Pretty hard dream.
How often does he have it?
Well, he was having it more than once a week, and this went on for over a year. And then finally, he couldn't do it anymore. The dream got to him, and he broke apart and had to be hospitalized. And then the book chronicles, his walk back from being so degraded by what had happened to him. And this is a case where it's not like he acted in a monstrous way. He acted well. He got blown up. He tried to save some guys. But if you said that to him now, Ayedi, you're a hero. I heard so many people say that to him so many times, and it's like, okay, whatever. But in his own mind, he's not.
He's still haunted
he's
by
the
the
guy who didn't save the driver.
Yeah. You pointed out in your first answer that when these guys come home, they come home to families in many cases. And in one case, I want to ask you about Adam Schumann, the wife Saskia, who says, "The women have to be the ones to adapt. That's the way it is for all of us."
Right.
What'd she mean by that?
Well, she was saying that in conversation with another wife of a mentally wounded soldier. And when Adam Schumann came home from the war, she didn't quite know what to expect. When I was describing him walking to the helicopter, he stopped along the way and he found the phone and he called her and said he was on his way home. And among the things she said was, "I'm afraid of what's going to happen. I'm afraid of what you might do to me." And he assured her nothing's going to happen. But he hung up and he said to me, "I don't know what's going to happen either." Well, what happened is he got off the plane once he hit Kansas. And when she was standing at the window and saw what he had become, this skinny, almost hunched over skeleton of a guy, that's when it hit her. This is not a happy homecoming here. We're in it for the long haul. And so that quote that she said to a friend, what their lives had become is so much of the centerpiece of the day's life of their family had become this injury. And Adam, of course, was absorbed just with the injury himself. And it was up to Saskia and to many of the women in this book. They have to be the strong ones.
But they go to bed scared almost every night, don't they?
Some nights they go to scared, and some nights they go to bed angry, and some nights they go to bed with hope, and it changes day to day, and that's what she was getting at. Everything is defined by this injury, and they have to adapt to it to try to bring the family back together.
When these soldiers come home in various stages of brokenness, what kinds of services are waiting for them when they come home?
Well, at least there's a system now. In previous wars, nothing of the sort. Guys coming home, World War I, World War II, as recently as Vietnam. When they came home, there was no system in place to help them deal with what they might be thinking at their deepest interior levels. Now the U.S. does have a system, but it is, as the book shows, it's a sloppy system. It's an overwhelmed system. It's a system populated with people who have good intentions, but the day-to-day absurdities can be heartbreaking. For instance, one quick story: Ayedi, the guy who was blown sky high. So his brain is rattled. His memory is not good anymore. And some days when he gets up, he's thrilled when he can find out where he parked his car the night before. He's a good guy, but this is just the reality for him now. So after he breaks down and is hospitalized, one thing the Army has done in the U.S. to help so many wounded soldiers either get back into their units or back to civilian life is they started these things called warrior transition battalions, where basically you get special attention. And so Ayedi gains admittance to this thing. Great for him, except his first day he's given a sheet of paper with 39 names on it. And so what you need to do over the next 3 days is meet all these people and get their signatures so we know that you met them. It's the chaplain, it's the pharmacist, it's the social worker, it's the caseworker, spread all over Fort Riley, Kansas. And this guy who can't find his car some days, to watch him for 3 days navigate this big Army post to find these people, sometimes he'd just stop in his tracks and start laughing. And some days he'd stop in his tracks, and the look on his face was the same look I saw on his face when he found out that guy had died. That there was a sadness, and there was an aspect of just being a failure.
You correct me if I'm wrong here, but my impression of things is that if you get a leg blown off, this Army is pretty good at getting you off the battlefield, patched up, rehabbed. That's one thing. But when 500,000 people come home needing mental health issue assistance, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah,
they're not up for this yet,
yeah,
are they?
but it's not just the numbers. It's the belief in the Army or in the military that mental wounds are serious wounds. And yes, there's all this, it's not just lip service. There's, in certain quarters, there is attention to the fact that a mental wound is a valid wound and a serious wound. But in the pecking order of a military, where the first thing they're trying to do is fight a war, and the second, get injured guys back in the game, back in the war. The pecking order, when you get down to the level of mental wound, and even below that, suicide, it gets some attention. But even the generals running the effort, these hardcore generals running the efforts to heal guys, they know that this is far from the top priority. Is
it your hope that this book will make the Pentagon reevaluate its priorities in this area?
I hate to talk about what my hope is, because it sounds like I have an agenda here. And these are not agenda-driven books, except that I'd like people, I care about these people, and I think anybody who reads these books will care about them too. And that's what the hope is, just that you care about these people. You have, instead of making assumptions about what war is or what the after-war is, you know from their day-to-day experience what's actually going on, and that's the best I can hope for. A book like this isn't going to change policy. I'm not naive enough to think that. But it can add to the discussion. It can add truth to the discussion of what's going on day to day in not just in this war, but really in any war, in any country, in any time. War is corrupting. We know that. War degrades. We know that. War is not a good thing. We get that. But sometimes, beyond that abstraction, if you read about the specific experiences of people going through it, then it's not abstract anymore. It becomes visceral. It's cemented into you.
Did you come to any conclusions after having hung out with these soldiers for so long about whether, quote unquote, the good war is possible anymore?
No, it wasn't that kind of discussion. What happened with these folks is any sense of, and I'm being general here, but with that caveat, any sense of big mission that they had gone over with quickly was mitigated by experience, and it came down to, I'm in it for the guy next to me, which became, I'm just in it because I don't understand what in the world happened to me and who I became over there. So it's not about good war or bad war or what's possible. It really is a much more isolated, specific discussion about what happened to me and how do I get better.
Okay, I get that, but do you come to the conclusion after spending so much time with troops that we should not fight wars anymore because people come home in pieces or broken, and we really can't do that to people anymore?
No, it's not that clean. I mean these. Take the war that we all consider the most moral war of recent times, World War II. Mm-hmm. If World War II were going on and my children were called into that war, I think you have to go into that war. But even when there's such moral clarity, people come out of it feeling the same way as this current set. So in some ways, whether the war is considered just or unjust, moral or immoral, all that kind of fades away when you're the guy at the center of the explosion, and in those first seconds, as I write in the book, you're feeling around to see if you're alive or you're dead or you're intact or you're in pieces, and your heart is galloping and your soul is darkening, and you begin the process of wondering, what have I become? That's a different thing, and then deciding, is war good or is war bad? It becomes so much more specific.
Well, if I can steal a bit from the title of the book, thank you for your book. That was one of the saddest things I've read in a while, but very necessary. Thank you for your service is the name of the book. David Finkel, from the Washington Post. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thanks, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.